Good morning, all. You can hit your present button so you're signed in.
We don't need to roll call.
Okay, good morning, all.
Good morning.
The two people haven't hit their present button yet, they can do that. How about those bucks?
Oh, yes.
Hey, bucks.
I watched the game.
So, if we can stand for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everybody logged in? Richard, present button, please. Thank you. Okay, before we start off, I'd like to congratulate our finance department on the, actually hit triple crown. This is an award given out for the financial department. 3 facets of it. One is the budget, one is our annual report, and one is called staffer. So only 2 companies in the state were awarded this, so kudos to the finance department. Now we can move on to public comment. Do we have any public comment in the audience today? No public comment, all right. Communications, Julie, you have it?
I have not.
Ron, on your plan, starting off with number 6, ordinance 21-2, shoreline and floodplain zoning map amendment, town of Super, section 5. We have a motion. Motion made by Supervisor Haas. We have a second. Second by Supervisor Wirt. We have any discussion? Any discussion? There is no discussion. I will clear the board for the vote. Motion carries on a vote of 17 yes, 0. Next up, we have ordinance 21-3, amending section 70201, the shoreline and floodplain zoning ordinance to adopt a letter of naturalization 1905-5425E and associated flood insurance study. We have a motion. Motion made by Supervisor Ross, second by Supervisor Polio. Is there any discussion? Discussion? There is no discussion. I will clear the board for the vote. Motion carried on a vote of 17-0. All right, next up we have our presentations on the comprehensive economic development strategy for southeastern Wisconsin. Eric Lindy and Kevin Hughes, you can both come up, so we swear back.
Thank you, Chairman, Supervisors. I'm Kevin Muse, Executive Director for the staff of the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. I believe many of you know who we are and what we do, but just briefly, the Regional Planning Commission is an advisory agency set up by the 7 counties in southeastern Wisconsin through state statutes founded in 1960. Our role is to provide advisory planning to the 7 counties and municipalities and towns regarding basically anything they ask us to, but traditionally that has been transportation, infrastructure and services, sewer and water supply, environmental corridors, land management, and then development and housing and things like that. So those are our traditional roles. I will say that our development role typically falls more on the where and how to develop and less on the economic development side and the attraction and things like that. But what we're presenting to you today is called the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. It is a document that is required by the Economic Development Administration, which is part of the US Department of Commerce, to qualify the region and distressed areas in the region for specific types of EDA grants. So these grants can be targeted towards infrastructure projects that may attract or retain jobs, or otherwise strategies or planning documents that can, again, work with attracting and retaining jobs. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric Lind, who is our Chief Special Projects Planner and led this effort. We certainly welcome questions at the chair's discretion at any point. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you for having me here. Eric Lind, Chief Special Projects Planner. Apologize if my voice goes in and out. I was at game 4 and I lost it then. Just now coming back last night did not help. But yeah, this SEDS that we're presenting to you today, there should be some materials in your packets, I believe, including a copy of the full report, which is a little longer. Then there's a brief summary handout, and then I think the presentation I'll give here. I'll try to keep it to about 10 to 15 minutes, so I might move through some things kind of quickly, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop me. So what is the SEDS? It's a 5-year plan. It looks out from 2021 to 2025. As Kevin mentioned, it's required by EDA to be eligible for EDA funding, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. It was prepared jointly between M7 and SewerPAC with a lot of input from different stakeholders, including the M7's Regional Economic Partnership, or REP group, which is a working group, and Kathleen Schilling is the county's representative on that group. And this one will replace the current SEDS that was adopted by the county back in 2015, and all 7 counties back in 2015. So why prepare a SEDS? As Kevin mentioned, the EDA requires a new SEDS, and they do require this every 5 years. And adopting it keeps the county and communities in the county eligible for EDA funding. That EDA funding is targeted at economically distressed areas, which EDA defines. And I'll talk about those on the next slide. I think one of the important things to note is that EDA looks at the SEDS when they're determining what projects to provide funding for. It's not EDA funding for our region is not a huge pot of money, but it is something. So we do want to make sure that we cover potential projects that could come from anywhere in the region to benefit those distressed areas. So you'll see some of the stuff that's in the action plan for the SEDS is kind of necessarily broad so that we can point EDA back to it when they review potential projects. And then I think particularly relevant to Ozaukee County is an adopted SEDS does allow us to apply to become an economic development district, or EDD, which would potentially open up more funding opportunities in Ozaukee County and some of the outer counties that maybe don't have as many distressed areas. So speaking of those distressed areas, as I mentioned, EDA targets funding to these distressed areas, and they define these using unemployment rate and per capita income. You can see where those are in the region. Only one of them in Ozaukee County here in Port Washington, but I would note that the city did get an EDA grant last year, I believe, for some backup battery generators for the wastewater and water treatment facilities. And then we note opportunity zones on here, which is a federal economic development tool, not as relevant to Ozaukee County, but they do mostly overlap with where those distressed areas are. Just a quick overview on the timeline. We did start this last summer. We had a couple rounds of stakeholder input, prepared a draft SEDS that was taken out for that second round of input, and then made a number of changes based on feedback we got, and prepared the completed SEDS, which is what we're presenting to you today. And over the summer, we're presenting this to all 7 counties, and then at the end of the summer, the Regional Planning Commission will vote to adopt it and then submit it to EDA for approval. So summary background, I'll move through this pretty quickly, but it's a required element of the SEDS, looks at a range of topics related to the regional economy, help to inform the action plan, and it did identify where racial disparities and vulnerabilities to the region's economic resilience lie. I think importantly, EDA has some investment priorities, and among the top priorities that they have are economic resilience and equity. So we want to have a SEDS that is competitive and addresses those priorities, and you'll see how we try to do that in some of the coming slides. A few key findings from the summary background. This is really a high-level sample of those findings. It's not all-encompassing, but we are a slower-growing region in terms of population and employment compared to our peers. We're challenged by an aging population and workforce, shortage of affordable housing, racial disparities. We do have strong educational institutions and a growing overall achievement level, and a lot of important assets that are unique to the region. There are issues related to availability and access to high-speed broadband internet, and challenges with the transportation system in terms of funding, getting people to jobs, keeping the transportation system in a state of good repair. One thing the SEDS does is identify key industry clusters that we have a competitive advantage in. So those are included in the summary background. And lastly, on measures of innovation and entrepreneurship, the summary background showed that there's some definite room for improvement. Oops. Another required element of the SEDS was a SWOT analysis. And this SWOT analysis was done as part of the first round of public input. Just a few of the SWOTs are listed on this slide. They're kind of overlapping with the summary background. If you want to see the full list, they're in the full report. In terms of strengths, we're a leading manufacturing region and have strong industry clusters, as I mentioned. Weaknesses in terms of disparities and policy differences across the region. Opportunities to adapt to the ongoing technological transformation, especially in manufacturing, and to improve the climate for entrepreneurs and startups. And then key threats are our aging population and workforce again, as well as a talent shortage and sort of a mismatch between the skills that workers have and what employers demand. So the strategic framework and action plan is really the meat of the SEDS. It was informed by those elements I mentioned before, heavily influenced as well by M7 and MMAC, which is the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, their Prosperity 2025 campaign, which was launched last year. The action plan here includes an overall economic development vision to be a globally competitive region that fosters innovation, collaboration, sustainable prosperity, and a high quality of life for all. And then within the action plan, there are 5 goals, each with a set of strategies and actions. As I mentioned, these are really broad ranging so that EDA has something they can look to when they evaluate projects. The graphic on here kind of gives an overview of what those 5 goals are. The first goal is an overarching goal to unite the region around a comprehensive approach to economic development. And then the 3 pillars that are in the graphic come from Prosperity 2025's pillars of growth, talent, and livability. And then the 5th goal is infrastructure, having a modern, efficient regional infrastructure that really supports the rest of the goals. As I mentioned, EDA has investment priorities related to equity and economic resilience. So there are a number of strategies and actions that do try to address that. I think the other thing to note here is we've tried to balance the needs and priorities of each county in the region, obviously recognizing that the priorities are different depending on which county you're in. Trying to make sure that there's something in the SEDS for everybody, and is especially trying to focus on what EDA funding is focused on, which is those distressed areas across the region. But just I'll go through this one pretty quickly, but resilience is referring to the ability to prevent, withstand, and quickly recover from major disruptions to the economic base, and then adapt to changing internal or external economic conditions, and that's EDA's definition. So the SEDS action plan does seek to address resilience in a number of different ways. And for the sake of time, I'll move through pretty quickly, but obviously a top priority is addressing the impacts that have been ongoing related to the pandemic. And in terms of equity, the SEDS does recognize that equitable access to economic opportunity is essential to a prosperous, resilient regional economy. We have some of the greatest disparities in the nation, as I mentioned. Pandemic has only intensified these. And then I think the one thing that the SEDS tries to do is find ways to address the inequities that we've found. So I have a slide on each of the 5 goals, and I will go through these relatively quickly. The first one is to unite the region around a comprehensive, equitable, and ongoing economic development agenda built on those 3 pillars of growth, talent, and livability. So things that are in this goal involve cooperation, collaboration, using sound planning and analyzing the economy so that we can develop investments, supporting policies and processes that will improve our economy's competitive standing, and then aligning economic development agendas under a mindset that victories for equity are victories for everyone. Second goal is around growth. And this goal is simply to grow, expand, and attract businesses. But I think, as we all know, that's more complicated than it is on its face. Number of strategies here, and I won't go through each of them, but we're obviously looking to develop a growth strategy as part of this effort, attract businesses, retain the businesses that we have, and help them expand. Trying to take advantage of our technology, and making sure that especially our manufacturing sector has the technologies that they need. And then I think building on our strength, which is still that we are a leading manufacturing center in the region. We do have those specific industry clusters that are mentioned in the report, and we want to capitalize on those, as well as focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. And then lastly, to increase our export capacity, focusing on making sure we have resources, especially for smaller companies that may not have the resources of larger companies. The third goal is around talent. The beginning of this goal, the first 4 strategies here are 4 talent pools that M7 and MMAC have developed to match the skills of the current workforce. So that's the first pool, to make sure that the needs of employers are met. And then the educational pipeline pool is about making sure that students are taught the skills that they need to be employed and to meet the needs of employers. The untapped potential pool is about getting more residents into the workforce. So there are a lot of residents that are not currently in the workforce. Maybe they don't have the skills that they need to get a job or to move up. So it's about getting more non-traditional workers into the workforce. And then the last pool is about attracting out-of-market talent, to making sure that the region is competitive and attractive to folks that aren't currently living and working here. And the last 2 strategies here, the first one is to make the region a region of choice for diverse talent. This is centered around an initiative that MMAC and M7 have been working on called the Region of Choice. And as part of this, employers across the region, I think a few in Ozaukee County, are pledging to hire more African-American and Hispanic employees. And then the last one here is to align workforce development with growth opportunities in those targeted clusters. Fourth goal is about livability, enhancing the region's quality of life and attractiveness. And this is done in a number of ways, supporting sustainable development that balances growth and quality of life. Again, making the region more attractive to residents, businesses, workers, and visitors. And then trying to remedy those longstanding disparities that I mentioned before. The fifth goal is to have a modern regional infrastructure. And strategies around this are to have a financially and environmentally sustainable transportation system, making sure that we have efficient, cost-effective public infrastructure and services, connecting underserved populations to jobs and other economic opportunities, and then lastly, to expand our access and availability to high-speed broadband internet. This is really the last substantive slide I have here is about implementing the SEDS. And we do have some performance measures identified, and M7 really tracks a number of the basic performance measures and sets goals to achieve as part of those performance measures. And then we identify that we will probably expand on those performance measures to evaluate the progress of the SEDS over the 5-year life plan, or life of the plan. Again, on those EDA investment priorities, these are provided in that implementation section in the full report. And I think one of the most notable parts of the implementation section are the ongoing and proposed economic development projects from across the region. So we have some regional projects that are noted here, as well as projects from each county. The Ozaukee County's projects are on page 98, and we did work with each rep member to make sure that projects from each county are incorporated into the SEDS in this way. So as far as next steps, obviously, we're coming to each county to ask for adoption of the SEDS, and then once each of the 7 counties act, we will bring the SEDS to the full regional planning commission and ask for adoption from them, and then Sewer PAC will submit the SEDS to the EDA and ask for approval. And I think that concludes my slides. I think maybe a little bit over 15 minutes, but obviously we're open to any questions, concerns.
Supervisor Nelson?
Thank you.
Sure.
Several places in your discussion, you mentioned the racial and ethnic disparity. Could you give me a couple concrete examples of what you're talking about?
Sure. Sorry, we finished.
Maybe we have it, we don't recognize.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, the commission did prepare a metro area comparison report, which includes the metro area includes the 4 counties. And as part of that report, we identify a number of measures of educational attainment, personal income levels, and poverty. And almost all measures compared to our peers were among the worst in terms of disparities between whites and people of color. Much higher income levels for whites compared to people of color, educational attainment, poverty, etc.
Was the education disparity though because of COVID, or was it an ongoing?
It's ongoing. Yeah, I think a lot of these are long-standing. The first edition of this report that we put out was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the disparities were shown as part of that report as well.
And do you have any recommendations on things that?
Well, we've got a number of things in here that I think are ways to try to remedy it. Obviously, it's a very tough nut to crack, so to speak. I think that as an infrastructure agency, Sewer PAC, as Kevin mentioned at the beginning, we're not first and foremost an economic development agency. We're more into infrastructure and land use. So a lot of the ways that we've recommended in our plans are how to get more folks to jobs, providing additional public transit or more innovative solutions to get folks that don't have access to jobs, maybe outside of the transit system area, as well as more affordable housing that is close to job centers that folks of lower wages can afford.
And my second question was, you mentioned one of the grants that came to, in fact, I think the other one that came to Ozaukee County was the generator backup for the water treatment plant. And yet, we have another 15+ million into updating, which we've been grandfathered, and all of a sudden, I guess it's the EPA, so no, you gotta come up with coal.
Okay.
So is there grant opportunities for that project?
I guess I maybe would have to know more details, or do you have a sense?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Supervisor, there may be grant opportunities for that project. So the connection for EDA always has to be attract or retain jobs. And so the idea for the batteries was that providing stability in the water supply and the treatment side of things would obviously enable additional economic growth, additional businesses, those sorts of things. If it's bringing it up to standards, we'd have to know more details to know if that's an EDA qualifying item. But there are other programs actually through EPA and related to the Clean Water Act. There's a water revolving loan fund that actually Congress is right now reinvesting in for the first time since the 1980s. And so that may be an option depending on the details going forward. There might be some federal grants. Yeah, and we'd be happy to talk about it, learn the details, and figure out if there's anything we can identify. So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Nelson. Supervisor Gravel?
Yeah, I see in the future plan, we had a proposed business park in the town of Grafton. Where exactly do you think that was going?
I guess it's probably pretty general in the SEDS. I'm not sure exactly. Are you familiar with that particular project?
I am not.
Okay.
So in this document, Supervisor, or in in the implementation? Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Because the last time we tried to run sewer and water out there, across the street from our most expensive subdivision.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I don't want to put her on the spot. Kathleen, do you know which project that is? The Grafton Business Park?
The town, even the town of the village has location for it.
Okay.
However, obviously, all of the village was looking at a.
Kathleen, step up to the microphone, please.
I usually so loud people are always. The village obviously had been looking at an industrial park, it did not work, but they are out of new industrial land and are continuing to examine opportunities either within the village or within the town of Grafton for a new industrial park. So I don't think they had a specific area, especially after the last area was unsuccessful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gravel. Any other questions? All right, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
So we will have a resolution, adopting the plan before the executive committee at their next meeting, and this will come to the board at your August 4th.
Okay, next up, we have a presentation by the Initiative for Clean Farm Families in Ozaukee County, Demonstration Farm Network. This group has worked very hard to put this together and have quite a bit of success all over the farm country. We have Andy Olschbach, we all know Andy from Land and Water. We have local farmer Matt Meeker and Mike Paulus, both representing clean farm families. And then Mike Patton from the USDA and yes, these are district conservation.
Yes.
So I will turn it over to Andy.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having us here this morning. And I have to tell you, I'm very excited to be here this morning and to share with you information about the Clean Farm Families, our Ozaukee County Demonstration Farm Network, and soil health. And I'm really grateful that we have two farmers with us here this morning. I know the weather is kind of nice for making hay, and I also grew up on a farm, and when we're supposed to make hay, we have to make hay. So I appreciate your time this morning. What we're planning on doing is I was going to start this off and just talk real briefly about soil biology, because I think it's important that you understand why we do what we're doing. And then Matt Winker is going to talk about the Clean Farm Families Group and the Ozaukee County Demonstration Network. And then Mike Paulus is planning on talking about both groups as well. And also in the back then, we have Mike Patton with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. We're planning on leaving here and going outside. We have a soil health trailer, which will simulate rainfall over certain soils under certain management scenarios. I think you're going to find it real interesting. I know I always have, and I always learn quite a bit as well. So with that, and I'll try to move right along as well. So there's three basic concepts that really we need to be thinking about with soils. You have to realize soil is alive. The soil is full of life. There's critters in there that need oxygen, need water, and we need to manage in respect for those, let the life in the soil. We also have to understand that there's a relationship between plants and soil and the whole environment. And you'll see certain animals feed off of plants, and plants will actually feed off of fungi and so on. And there's this symbiotic relationship that's going on. And as we all know, nature has its way of probably doing a better job than we can with anything that we tend to do. So we tend to try to mimic nature, so to speak, as we manage things. Don't treat me like dirt, I am life. Have you ever seen one of these? This is actually a water bear. I have to admit, I've never seen one either, but it's kind of an interesting critter. It lives in the soil. It's a critter that can actually withstand minus 328 degrees and positive 300 degrees. They say if the earth were to be destroyed, this critter would probably survive. And it lives in our soil. It tends to live more so where you have a more wetter environment, but you could have a wet area in a farm field and you might have a critter like this living there. This is just another sample or an example of microbial life in the soil. The microbial life in the soil will break down nutrients and make things available to the plants which would not otherwise be available if you didn't have these microbial life in the soil. Plants and soil are one. Here's a plant root that's growing, and as these plant roots grow, they're exuding sugars, they're exuding amino acids, they're exuding nutrients that are beneficial to the microbes that live in the soil. So the more you can have plants in the soil, the longer you can have plants growing in the soil, the more beneficial these plants are to the microbial life in the soil. So there's that interconnectedness there. And right around the root hairs, you have just millions and billions of life working together. Another thing that we're always interested in is capturing solar energy. When the plants get the energy from the sun, they photosynthesize. They're actually, the plants then are releasing in their roots, they're providing the nutrients then to the microbial life. And the more sun, the more plants, the more life in the soil, the more that the plants and the life in the soil can break down the nutrients. Farmers then don't have to put on as much fertilizer to try to get the nutrient cycle functioning, the water cycle functioning, and the chemical cycle functioning. So, it's not uncommon in the county or the country to see bare fields. Certainly looking at a slide like this, the one on the right is the most beneficial. We have the plants capturing the energy, putting it into the soil, feeding the soil, breaking down nutrients. We're storing carbon dioxide. We're building carbon in the soil, that sort of thing. The picture on the right is actually a cover crop field that was put on the Roger and Brian Carl's farm. They're one of our Ozaukee County demonstration farmers. This is just an interesting slide. Have you ever worked in the garden and you pull out a plant root and you see this white, fuzzy, cottony material, so to speak? It's Mycorrhizae fungi. Mycorrhizae fungi and plant roots work together. The Mycorrhizae fungi can actually be 700 times more dense than the roots itself that are in the soil. So the Mycorrhizae fungi, they have this whole big web going through the soil, and they're actually gathering water and nutrients and feeding the plant. And the plant in turn is providing the Mycorrhizae fungi nutrients, and they're kind of feeding off of one another. And that's why we try to promote long-term no-till, because once you get no-till long-term and you're not disturbing all these types of things, you have better nutrient cycling and better water functioning, that sort of thing. And mycorrhizae fungi and other animals, they actually produce a biotic glue that'll hold the soil particles together. So when it rains, your soil particles are strong, they're bonded, they're not loose, and they're going to be stronger, they're not going to erode. The soil pores in the soil are also going to be held open, they're not going to collapse. So it's very important that we try to have this life in the soil, have the biotic glues and hold the soil together, and Mike Patton later will demonstrate some of that. And as we look at nutrient cycling, cover crops, no-till, one of the objectives too is to have the farmer be more profitable. And there's been studies with NRCS and the American Farmland Trust that have found that, there's always a range of profitability. Some years maybe there's a little negative there. But a lot of times people are making $25 to $45, $50 an acre more following the soil health principles, because you don't have to put in as many inputs and so on. That's all about relationships. Certainly the farmer on the left there isn't thinking about the life in the soil and the productivity he could get out of the soil, but the person on the right there is doing a lot of things that Matt Winker does, planting no-till, planting green, not disturbing the soil, capturing the sunlight, getting that water cycle and nutrient cycle functioning. So this soil here is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. So we're hoping we can put a little clothes on our soil here in Ozaukee County. And we find that once the soil temperature reaches 90 degrees, a lot of the biology in the soil stops functioning like it should. So that's the reason we want cover crops. We want things growing and green and that sort of thing. But it all makes common sense. So our four soil health principles that the Clean Farm Families and the Ozaukee County Demonstration Farm Network are following are to have a continuous living root in the soil, have that root functioning, feeding the biology and so on. We don't want to disturb the soil, so we're promoting no-till. And then we're looking at biodiversity. The more biodiversity you have, you get different root structures, you get different root depths, you get different plants feeding different biology in the soil. So the more diversity we can have, the better. And then we also want to maximize our soil cover. Keep it covered all the time, keep it armored to prevent erosion. So the Clean Farm Families was established in 2016. The Wisconsin Department of Ag had a new grant that came available. It was called the Watershed Protection Grant. Actually, what happened is once this grant became available, I reached out to Jim Malachar. Jim Malachar is a farm leader here in the county, and he said we should work together and go for this. So we did, and we were successful in getting some grant funding. So that's kind of how it started. And we're fortunate enough, Jim reached out to farmers, and we have a really good, strong farm team that works together really well. We get funding from the Wisconsin Department of Ag. We roughly get about 30 to 40,000 a year from the Wisconsin Department of Ag, about 20,000 from the Fund for Lake Michigan. And this last year, we have $14,700 from a conservation innovation grant from USDA. And then I just wanted to mention, we were able to purchase some equipment for the group. We have a roller crimper, which Matt is going to talk about. And we also have an interseeder planter, which Mike Paulus actually surprised me this morning and pulled up with the tractor and the interseeder planter. So you'll get to see that too. With that, I'm going to move along, and our next presenter then is Matt.
Morning. So I'm one of the Ozaukee County demonstration farm, demo farms, I guess you could call it. There's four of us, Jim Malachar and his son Adam, myself and my wife, Lake Breeze Farm, which is Brian and Roger Carls, and then last year we added a fourth, and Joe Lipinski and his wife Amy. There's just four of us standing here. Obviously I'm top center, Brian and Roger will be on the left. Jim and Adam be on the right, and the center is in the red shirt. There is Joe. Like Andy said, Clean Farm Families was started in 2016. In efforts to kind of get out there and show other farms the benefits of soil health, the money you can save, and the environmental impact you can have. This is the most recent board member picture. There was two of us added in 2020. Here would be myself and Brian Vorpagel, but the other 8 were the original ones from 2016. We added 2 board members because we expanded from not only the Milwaukee River watershed, but to the remainder of Ozaukee County, excluding the Cedar Creek watershed, which is kind of the Grafton, Cedarburg area. Here's our grants, people who helped fund us. Fund for Lake Michigan, which is a great thing to be a part of. Our water being in Ozaukee County, the most of us, we are draining straight into Lake Michigan. So obviously, a farm who's doing extensive tillage, your soil is eroding. And you might see it maybe just move to the bottom, but it went past that. It went to the neighbor's field and down the waterway, and it's now in the river, which dumps into the Lake Michigan. So very important to keep our soil on our fields, because the soil that is leaving has chemicals in it, it has fertilizer in it, phosphorus. And the soil that it moves is your best soil in the field. Here is our demonstration plot. This is on Pete Eskra's farm on Highway 57, just south of Fredonia. It's a great location. This farm here was actually in CRP for about 30 years. And unfortunately, being in CRP, it wasn't really in a good growing crop. It ran the ground tight. It ran it out of nutrients. So it was a perfect field to use to demonstrate. We have 3 side-by-side plots. Each one, an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot. One of them is no-till with cover crops. The other one is conventional tillage. Like you see farmers out in the fall, they're chisel plowing, they're deep ripping, moldboard plowing. In spring, they're making a couple viber shank passes. In the no-till environment, obviously, we don't do any tillage. We're just pulling in the fall. We're planting a cover crop. In spring, we're coming in planting into that cover crop with our cash crop. So it's more of a set aside. I think there was, maybe I'll lean on Andy. He could probably explain this better.
Well, it was a conservation program through the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency, and it was like a 20-year set aside program. Yeah.
To take cash crops out of production.
Right.
Yeah, if anybody's got questions, fire away. So anyhow, so being part of this group, I cannot, from my experience, and I'm sure Mike can probably say the same thing. This has been one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me in my life, is being a part of this. A lot of the nationally known soil health speakers I've got to meet and know at a personal level. I've had personal phone call conversations with them. The guy in the plaid shirt there that with the white hair, that's Ray Archuleta, and I probably talk to him on the phone 3, 4, 5 times a year. And actually, we took a family vacation to Missouri to go visit him. So that's how well we know him. I learned a lot from that guy. This was I think our first time he was up by us. This is where he spoke in Wabaka. And then I think we had him up the following year. The picture on the right, we were out in Bob Roden's field in not near West Bend area, I guess you could call it. Where he showed us hands-on what no-till and cover crops do. If you look at a fence line where you got trees and you got, grass in between farmers' fields, that is the healthiest soil you'll ever find because it's never been touched. This is actually the top center picture is actually interseeding on our farm. 2 years ago, this was right after the interseeder was purchased. And as you can see on the bottom left there, that's kind of the start of the interseeding crops coming up. We use interseeding to kind of help feed our crop a little bit. We also use it for soil health purposes. And we also use it too now when we forage that corn. And even as much as when them leaves start to dry down, that canopy kind of goes away. Now that interseeding crop in between there is getting a lot of sunlight. And that stuff really takes off like gangbusters. So now we have our soil already armored going into wintertime to help reduce runoff. Like I said, we want our soil staying on the farm. We don't want it running off and running into our lakes and rivers. So this is just a practice we use for various ways, but that's kind of highlights. The upper right picture would be a perfect one where the corn is dried down and you can see how that cover crop is starting to really take off and provide a lot of cover. Even when it does rain out, impact of a raindrop hitting the soil is like a bullet. That's how much impact it can do. Well, obviously when it hits a growing crop of corn, soybeans, interseeding, cover crops, that has stopped that impact. Now it gently hits the ground. Yep, go ahead. That's just the one that's owned by the county there. Yeah. Jeff Bell through the county here is kind of in charge of the interseeder. Me as a farmer, if I'm looking to get some interseeding done, I get in contact with Jeff, and obviously it's the unfortunate part is it kind of goes like gangbusters for 3 weeks. That thing's running pretty hard and heavy, and we've got to get across a lot of acres. But that's just part of farming. It's no different than planting spring crops to fall harvest to all that stuff. We got to go. So this is just the same picture here. This particular year, I would say we were in a little late with it. Maybe a little bit smaller is ideal because we want to get them cover crops established. We want to get them up and running. before the canopy of the corn closes it in. We also do, obviously, Ozaukee County has a lot of dairy. When we do apply our dairy manure, we want to do low disturbance. We don't want to be out there chisel plowing it in. And every time you go out there with a tillage tool, you're killing all your microbes in your soil. So all summer long, you worked hard to build up your microbe activity, and you just killed it by driving across it with a chisel plow. So obviously this is manure applicator kind of set up like a grain drill where it's just providing a slot, very little disturbance, and there's a closing wheel in the back that'll close that soil back up. Mike Paulus had this on his farm, and you could walk across this field in your church shoes if you really wanted to. That's how there was no soil out there anywhere, or no manure out there anywhere. And we do a lot of field days between the Clean Farm Families and the Ozaukee County Demonstration Farm Network. I always look forward to them. You get to see a lot of your neighbors there, and you get to see a lot of some of the stuff we're practicing, show them what's worked, what hasn't worked, so on and so forth. This is just our list of incentive payments that the Milwaukee River Watershed and Clean Farm Families currently does. For cover crop, obviously this is payments out on cover crop acres. The first, when a person goes from conventional tillage into no-till and cover crops like we did 8 years ago, you do have a yield jag for about 3 years. So it is kind of important to help get farmers financially incentivized to get into this, because yes, yield is important, but profitability is more important to us than yield. This was a Soil Health Academy that myself, Andy Holzbach, Bob Roden, and Jim Melikar attended. The guy in the Green Bay Packers sweatshirt is Gabe Brown. He's from near Bismarck, North Dakota. Probably one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He was on the verge of bankrupt to the point where the banks are about ready to pull a pin, and turned his soil into probably the most highest fertility soil I've ever seen. Very, very smart guy. The guy standing just behind him is Russell Hedricks. He's from North Carolina. He's actually younger than myself and just an amazing guy. Got to be good friends with him. When you get to meet a lot of these people, you get to look up to them, you get to learn from their successes, their failures. Obviously, Russell is farming in a different area than I am, North Carolina to Wisconsin. He gets to do different things, but you take it with a grain of salt and apply as much as you can. So this was a 3-day school that I really learned a lot from. This is me, my wife, my 2 daughters. This is our home farm here. We're on Highway A, just east of Fredonia. We milk 125 cows, 450 acres of total land we run. We have reduced a bunch of our herbicide use, but the biggest thing I can stand up here and say is we cut our yearly diesel fuel in half. We went from running about 10,000 gallons a year down to 5,000. Times that times $2 a gallon, it's $10,000 I just saved. And labor, obviously. All the tillage passes I don't have to do anymore. All I do is that particular field you see me standing in, I'll either come in and plant it first, or I'll come in and kill that cover crop off, but I got 2 passes into it and I'm completely done. One quote, and I got one at the end here, I really wanted to share with you guys that really kind of got me going in the direction I'm in. If you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make major changes, you got to change the way you see things. From why I went from conventional over to no-till, if I just want to make a small change, well, I'll just go to vertical till instead. Well, I wouldn't be where I am today if I just would have made a small change. I had to change totally how I'm seeing things. When I went to no-till, I had no clue what I was doing, because everything I learned throughout my years of farming, I threw away. So Couple of little, and I gotta try and run through these quicker. I'm gonna get long here, but this is just some information I wanted to share too. This is all stuff from the Soil Health Academy in Watertown that we attended. Look at all the mineral depletions in our vegetables we've had since the 1940s to 1990. And that's all because of tillage. Tillage, unfortunately, is probably the worst thing that's ever happened to agriculture. This is all our depletions in our meats, whether you're eating sheep, beef, Angus beef, chicken. This is all because we depleted our soil with so many minerals, fertility, lack of keeping our microbes alive. This is what it's done to our food. And food is what we eat that keeps us healthy. So this is just another little thing. You'd have to eat twice as much meat and 3 times as much fruit and 4 to 5 times as many vegetables to get the same amount of minerals you would back in 1940. This is actually one of our rented fields. All them bumps you see there, them are all worm castings. By me not tilling that soil, look at our soil, our earthworm activity we have in that soil. Unfortunately, this was a springtime picture. That's not what we want to see. We want to see that ground covered. That particular field, it got harvested so late, the ground was froze. I couldn't do anything with it. What I know now, we would go through and frost seed something in spring and get something going. So April, May, there's at least 2-3 inches of something growing out there to absorb our rain impact and our soil runoff. But them earthworms running through the soil, that's free tillage. Them earthworms are tunneling through the ground, creating places for water to run away and loosening soil compaction. Whoa, how do I go back? Okay, and this is the same exact field on a tilled field. And if anybody runs a garden and you run a rototiller, your soil is very fine. We don't want fine soil. We want coarse, almost like a cottage cheese type material. And this is what you see here. And this particular field was only no-tilled, I think about 4 or 5 years before I turned it from fine clay powder into a cottage cheese-like material. This is just how we would plant our cover crops, especially late fall. This is just a John Deere drill. Basically, there's just a blade at a little bit of an angle that's just putting a slot in the soil, and there's a closing wheel in the back just pushing that slot back shut. There, you will not see any difference from the front of the drill to the back of the drill. And this is actually this last year, me planting corn. This is in a sod field. This hay here was about knee high when I was in it, and you can't even hardly tell I was in there. This is from a different year, but this is kind of what you can see here. I moved very little soil with that corn planter. Basically, we're opening a trench. We do have to move just a little bit of soil to get that trench back closed because it's very important with corn to have good seed soil contact, a little bit of fluffness, but there will not be any soil running off of this field if we get a heavy 4, 5, 10-inch rainfall. It'll all stay put. And that's a very important because, like I said, we don't want our chemicals, our fertility, or our soil going into our lakes or rivers. This was last year. This was the county's roller crimper. So we have a front hitch on the front of the tractor, and it's rolling down. This is cereal rye, and it's about this tall on me, and it's rolling it down flat like you see there. And that corn planter had absolutely no problems getting the soil or seed in the ground, and the furrows closed back up. Now I just armored that soil from rain and from heat. We don't want our soil temperatures getting too hot. We're killing our microbes, and we're not helping our cash crops any.
So you're just flattening, you're not cutting.
Yep, basically there's just them on that roller, that blunt edge will crush. Well, actually it'll use the word crush, but it's crimping it, and it's actually killing in the same time. This particular field is a little thin. I didn't get the best of kill on it. We did come back and use a herbicide on it to finish it off, but it killed, I would say, about a third of it mechanically without any fertilizer or without any herbicide use. So another thing we do use, this is winter rye. This stuff is about shoulder high on me. turns out it's very good heifer forage for our heifers for the year. One crop of rye, we can feed our heifers for an entire year. This is actually the intercedar driver was unable to drive that night, and I said, I'll drive it. So I think I'm the first farmer that drove it, but so this is kind of ideal. This was actually that same slide I showed you earlier where I was planting in sod, alfalfa fields. So this is now, you can see our sod has died, but look at the ground cover I have with that dead alfalfa still in between them corn rows. Now I'm coming back through and I'm interseeding another, it's a 5-way mix to help feed the corn the rest of the year and provide fall soil protection. And this is last fall. Andy forgot to turn the slide. This was right before we were corn silage harvest. That's the growth we had underneath it. Obviously, once the corn is off, that stuff will take off. And this was a field that we interseeded in 2020. This is now, I think, was about the second week of May of 2021. And you can see the amount of soil protection we had there throughout all of winter and spring. And this is the exact same field 2 weeks later. This picture here, the kind of ferny looking things, that's hairy vetch. It puts a lot of nitrogen in the soil, which is a fertilizer we have to purchase a lot of for corn. That just grew me a lot of nitrogen and put it in the soil. And it didn't cost me hardly anything. So that's for this stuff now, 2 weeks later, this is over my waist. And this is the exact same field, me planting into it. Just wanted to show, like I said, I had very little disturbance and I had no issues planting through it. I'll let it talk and I'll finish.
Visualization compresses 1 year of data to a few minutes.
On the bottom is the month. It'll scroll through.
Carbon dioxide is on the other hand, is absorbed by natural rain and ocean reservoir.
Red is not what we want to see.
We see the highest concentrations North America, Europe, and Asia. Notice how the gas doesn't stay in one place. The dispersion of carbon dioxide is controlled by the large-scale weather patterns within the global circulation.
So this is April where there's more tillage and things taking place.
In summer, plants absorb a substantial amount of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, thus removing some of the gas from the atmosphere. We see this change in the model as the red and purple colors start to fade.
So now you see it's starting to turn blue. Everybody's cash crops are now absorbing a lot of that carbon dioxide emissions or putting it into the soil.
Meanwhile, in the southern hemisphere, we see the release of another carbon monoxide. This is the gas that is both harmful to the environment and to humans. During the summer months, plumes of carbon monoxide stream from fires in Africa, South America, and Australia, contributing to high concentrations in the atmosphere. Notice how these emissions are also transported by winds to other parts of the world. As summer transitions to fall and climate photosynthesis.
No.
Carbon dioxide begins to accumulate in the atmosphere. Although this change is expected, we're seeing higher concentrations of carbon dioxide accumulate in the atmosphere each year.
You'll notice in fall, the red will start picking back up again when guys are doing fall tillage, because all the carbon dioxide and carbon we put in the soil, now they're now re-releasing it back into the atmosphere.
Provide local view carbon dioxide. Those CO2 observations and atmospheric models like Geospot will work closely together to better understand both human emissions and natural fluxes of carbon dioxide. This will help guide on models for more reliable predictions of future conditions across the globe.
So what's happening there is when you have tillage, your organic matter in the soil actually oxidizes. That releases CO2 into the atmosphere.
And we don't want to do that. That's, when you go out into a farm field that was freshly tilled and you get that good earthy smell, that's not what you want to smell. You just blew all your carbon back up in the atmosphere. We want to keep the carbon in the soil. And that's what we're doing with no-till and cover crops. And the more carbon we can put in the soil, the more organic matter we're going to gain, the more fertility we're going to be able to hold on to, and the more crops we're going to be able to grow off that same acre. So, but I didn't want to talk too much because it was kind of talking already, but that's kind of the overview. You did notice in summer, it kind of went away. The crops are grabbing all them greenhouse gases and they're pulling in their soil. You notice in fall, when the crops kind of stopped growing until it started incurring again, you're blowing it right back up in the air. And we don't have anything growing during the winter months to pull that down into the soil. So here's just what our, I'm gonna look here what you got. Oh, why it's talking about interseeding, why it's good for our soil. Like I said, it is helping our soil stay intact. Each of them interseed crops are feeding off one another. So it's a natural feed, so we don't have to feed them with fertilizer on our end. This one I thought was cool. This one I kind of wanted to finish up a little bit. The 3 C's of life: choices, chances, and changes. You must make a choice to take a chance if you want anything in life to change. Kind of really summed it up for me for how we got into this. If I didn't take a chance at doing something different, nothing would have changed for me. So we've been a lot more profitable since we started on this journey. Phosphorus and potassium, neither one we bought in over 5 years, and it's because we stopped tilling the ground and using our cover crops to use that, put that fertility into the soil. We do have cow manure, which has obviously got phosphorus and potassium in it, and we're applying it on surface and at very low rates that it gets sucked into the ground and it stays put. And this is just one of our field days we had. And of course, they got to give me the microphone and I got to sit up in front of everybody and talk. But just kind of showing some of the soils that we have in front of us. And but it's been, like I said, this has been an awesome journey I've been on. I am enjoying every second of it. And hopefully I made sense. I guess anybody got any questions? I'm not a public speaker.
I just wanted to say too, for us as a department, establishing a Clean Farm Families Group and a demonstration farm network, that's probably the best. Well, it is the best thing that ever has happened for our department. If we can truly get our soils healthy the way they should be, in my opinion, we can do so much more for water quality. It's all about water quality. Soil health will have a great impact on water quality. So the more we can promote it, I'm 100% behind the soil health movement.
If we can get everybody on board with doing no-till and cover crops, the Milwaukee River is going to stop being brown because the water that is going to go into it's going to be clear. Go ahead.
Great presentation. What do you think the biggest impediment to farmers adopting this process? Fear. First time I pulled into the corn planter to no-till and no field, I was crapping my pants, and that's being blunt about it. I was so scared because you don't know, you got a lot of money invested in obviously time. We got fuel, we got seed, corn seed that keeps going up every year in price. Now, if you go out there and you plant it in the ground and a third of it comes up and you got to redo it again, now you basically just throw that money away. It's fear. Fear is the biggest. That's the one I had to overcome the most.
Plus you have social pressure too.
Yeah, social pressure, for me, I was one of probably the first ones in the area to start doing this. Now, if you have a particular field or fields that fail, you're to talk at a town in a quick hurry. And it's not a good feeling, but you'd be tough about it. try again next year. But fear is the biggest thing to overcome, I think. And there is, like I said, the first 3 years, you are gonna get a yield drag out of it. You know, and farming is tough enough the way it is, and now going into it, now you're gonna get less out of it. But you do save, you know, when you do get over it, get started, the money you save in fuel and your time, usually you'll recoup that. But yeah, there's definitely a yield drag, and it all depends on the field. I've had some that didn't really drag at all, and I had some that dragged pretty hard. So, yes.
You had a picture of corn stalks, and then you would interseed it between with something.
Yep.
What happens to the corn stalks? They just die off, or?
Yeah, in fall, and that's where, so that over the fall and the winter and spring, what was that corn stalk, them microbes are feeding on that all year round. So that's actually, we're allowing the microbes to consume the dead stalk, and they're going down into the soil and pooping it back out. Well, that's free fertility. So
you don't do anything with the corn stalks after they?
Nope.
Harvest?
Nope, they stay right there. No, as we use that too for soil protection for cover and to feed earthworms, microbes, all that stuff. And we have the first couple of years, you know, it's like, boy, now you're not tilling them under. They didn't disappear very fast. I got trouble keeping them on the ground now. It's like they disappear on me so fast. I wish they wouldn't, because it's your armor in the soil. But we've allowed our earthworms, insects, all that stuff to be alive. They consume that. It's gone.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for listening.
Our next presenter then is Mike Paulus. Mike is one of our founders for the Clean Farm Families Group. Mike is always there to give us a helping hand, and he's a very creative person too. He helps fabricate things for us. For example, we brought that roller crimper. We had to find a way to transport it. Well, Mike came up with the idea, buy a low profile trailer, and you mounted brackets on it for us and so on. It's an honor for me to work with these guys.
Well, thank you, board, for having us this morning. As you've heard, you know, we started in 2016, and one of the first years we had a man by the name of Ray Archuleta talk, and a year later we had him back. And I remember sitting there at that meeting and thinking, boy, this is over my head, and some of this stuff can't happen. But you listen, take a little bit home, and you start to watch your ground and start doing things like he says. And by golly gee, there's a little things are starting to happen. And this is what I thought couldn't happen. And he's telling me it will happen, and I'm now seeing it on my farm. I farmed all my life with my grandfather and my father. And the theory still remains the same. If you take care of the ground will take care of you. That hasn't changed. But now in 2000, we're looking at this a little different. This cover crop, this having something out there all the time is making a world of difference. You know, I wasn't the best student in school because I didn't think they taught it to me the right way. And Ray Archuleta always says, the ground is an environment, a little cube, a little ecosystem. And I like to put it in layman's term here. Just think of a subdivision. It was a field. We turned it into houses, yards, planted trees. What would happen if every year a tornado came through and wiped the whole thing out? Would it be healthy? But if you can sustain that, houses, trees, lawns, and that's what we're trying now to do with our fields, maintain a living crop on those fields the whole year. The first couple of years since 2016, you know, we got into this, we had plans on cover crops and things like that. And boy, we had some tough years, wet springs, wet falls, late falls. And some of the things with late falls is we do not get our crops or cover crops established early enough that they have growth. And that's why this interseeder that you've seen, we seed it now in June, late June and July. It kind of goes dormant in that cornfield. And then when the corn is taken off, it comes back to life. It's planted, it's growing. Where if we harvest corn in October, try plant a cover crop, it's cold, wet or something, we don't get it established. So it's just one of them things where we're living, you know, we cool, you know, if we were 100 miles or 200 miles to the south, this would work great. So in fall of 2020, last year, we really had a nice early fall and a lot of cover crops got planted. And it was amazing to drive around the country this spring and see how much green was out there. And as Andy's referred to and Matt has talked about, having that green, having the soil covered with something growing. You know, you go back in history and think of what were the Dust Bowls of the 1930s. It was cropland that was bare. The wind blew the ground around, wind erosion. People lost farms, you know, soils piled up wherever. You know, we're just trying to keep the ground covered and growing it all the time. You've seen we were able to purchase that interseeder, you know, with some of the grants we've gotten. But as Matt said, we now have opened, we started this thing as a Milwaukee River watershed. People that were just in the Milwaukee River watershed. Now we've expanded it to the whole county. So as we have our, we have funding for people that want to try it, little incentive to try it and stuff like that. As more and more people use it, our funds get depleted earlier. This is where the county board always hears, but. There are funds out there, but we're always looking for more. You know, if somebody's got it near and dear to their heart that would like to help us out on a project, you know, it'd be really appreciated. What we're looking at this coming year is, well, as everybody knows, there's no equipment out here, no cars out here. The tractor we use, we lease right now, we've been told it may not be available next year for us to lease. And we sure would like to get something down that we could buy it, that it would be here, because it's being used from early spring all the way into fall. So if there's anybody that this subject touches their heart and would like to work with us, donation or anything, just contact Andy. And the tractor and the interseeder are here today. And when we get out there, if you have any questions, we'll explain. Thank you.
Any questions for Mike?
I guess one thing I'd like to add quick on that interseeder, it does convert over back to a no-till drill. So in springtime and in fall time, if a farmer wants to get into no-tilling, it does ease the burden of having to purchase a piece of equipment. They can rent ours to get them started into it 2, 3, 4, 5 years to the point where now, you know, maybe they can buy their own drill. So it's a way to get farmers into it and started, but I guess, yeah, we forgot to mention, it's a 2 drill system. You can use as a no-till drill and a interseeder. Sorry to interrupt, Mike, I just thought I'd mention that quick.
Any other questions for Mike or Matt?
I just show one, I'll be real. So Matt talked about how on 90% we have a soil health demonstration site. Just a few days ago, I grabbed a sample of soil from a no-till plot. Right next door is a conventional plot. What I did is I did the soil stability test. Basically, you just take these cans and submerge them in water. This is actually the conventional tillage one, and this is the no-till. This is after 3 years of no-till, basically. And you'll notice the conventional tillage, it was the same size as this patch here. And I talked earlier about how the biology in the soil makes glues that hold the soils together and so on. Well, the biology from roadkill here is, holding the soil together versus this one. I just wanted to show you that. It's, just after 3 years of no-till, you have a much more stable soil, which can support it. And Mike will demonstrate a lot of that. I hope you all have time to see our soil health driller still, because it's kind of an eye-opener.
Rainfall simulator is pretty cool.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this.
Can I direct the correct?
No. We don't want to take a vote on that. Well, thank you for coming in and giving that presentation. Two real innovative farmers from Ozaukee County. I know. So we have no committee appointments today. Any supervisors have any announcements today that they want to announce? Supervisor Nelson?
Just a reminder about the golf outing coming up, the United Way of Ozaukee County. Benefits a lot of the agencies here at the county, so consider signing up and having a great time.
Thank you, Supervisor Nelson. Any other announcements from supervisors? If not, I would strongly advise just take a couple minutes to look at the demonstration right down here in Eagle Parking. And these fellows put a lot of time and energy into their work every day in their presentation, so I would appreciate that. So we will recess right now and we'll reconvene down there and we'll adjourn down there on Main Street.
I will be.
We're gonna say it until we get down, we'll adjourn on the street.
I'll see the Actually, I recommend watching
to see something else. I still have one extra week, so if you can't, I really have to notice by the next year. Okay, because the one thing I don't want to do is sign up, because that's what I'm
registration.
like, it just depends on much. And she doesn't, she wants to consume that.
I'll let you know.
But he is some, or is he not?
Which is sad.
I thought I said,
That's it.
yeah, I thought it was his son, but I didn't know. I don't know, and I said something, yes, it's not coming. I think it was his son. I don't think it was him, I don't know. Yeah, you have to, yeah, ask him. Nada.
You know?
I'd like to introduce Mike Pat. Mike is our district conservation. I have to tell you, Mike is one heck of a guy, first of all. Together, he's always ready to help us, always right there, very dependable and very glad to have him here this morning. He's also on the state soil health committee. And he's very good regarding soil health and all the work that he's doing.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Thanks. So Andy, like Andy said, I work for USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone that came down to take a look at the great work that the producers in your county are doing. I think you guys have something really special here in Ozaukee County that a lot of counties, a lot of states don't have. You've got a diverse group of producers doing things to the land because they know it's the right thing to do. And I really want you guys to really appreciate the work that Matt and Mike and the producers around them are doing here. And I would challenge you guys to look at, when we have our field days scheduled, to come on out, take a look, get the sights and sounds, and really get passionate on what we're doing out here in the landscape. Because we all live in Ozaukee County. We all live in a watershed. Everything we do has an impact on our soil, water, air. And like Andy Hosbach would always say, we're all in this together, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'll kind of briefly go through this. So there are 4 soil health principles, of which Andy and Mike and Matt all hit on, right? We hit on crop diversity. We all know crop and also a living biological system, right? This isn't a growing medium that you go to Stein's Gardens and Gifts. This is something that's alive, it wants to be alive, it's biologically active, and if you treat it like a growing medium, what you're gonna see the effects in soil, in the water, is it's gonna roll off the landscape. So the first principle is cropping diversity. Soil health principle is keeping it covered, right? So when we get the soil health simulator going, I'm gonna make it rain. I want you to think about these 4. So keeping the soil covered. Matt mentioned that's important to keep those rainfall droplets from impacting the soil. The third principle of soil health is always keeping something living, growing, and alive, right? I mean, we go to some of the great resources in Ozaukee County, such as Harrington State Beach or any number one of our parks like Limestone Gorges, and we see the natural environment, right? It's alive, it's living, it's diverse. It's not a monoculture. And so the producers in our county and in the nation are looking at creating a diverse system to mimic nature. And obviously with agriculture, we can't mimic all those things, right? We can't do those things. We have to produce food, fiber for our people here. So these producers are doing the best that they can with the diversity. So we talked about keeping the living root. So the fourth soil health principle, oh man, now I've keep the soil covered, keep something living in the soil, diversity, and no disturbance. Thanks, Andy. So the fourth soil health principle is don't disturb the soil or very minimally disturbing it. So when we think about life, you know, there are many stages in the scale of life, right? We all are doing different things. Some people are just like the Bucks, you know, they're great basketball players. Not all teams are that great. It's the same thing with soil health. Some soil producers in soil health are doing, they're the Bucks of their field, where others, because of that fear, because of not wanting to change and make those choices, choose to do the same things, not necessarily because they always don't want to, but because that's the system they're in. So think about the disturbance. The lower we can disturb our soil, the better it's going to be for soil health. So I'm going to have Andy turn the water on here, and I want you to watch this penny. Put this penny here. So we're going to run it here a little bit. And so, okay. I just got it out of the way. So what this is doing is this is demonstrating. I want you guys to look at it. The first soil here is our fence undisturbed, right? That's mimicking nature. There's no disturbance. Biological diversity. The second one here is a no-till rotation with cover crop. This cover crop was what Matt was talking about last year being interseeded, and this is the residue from last year. This third field here was corn last year. It was interseeded or seeded with cereal rye. Matt had talked about taking the cereal rye off the seed, right? This is the result of cutting that rye off. It's that living plant is still in there. And this field here is a demonstration of what would be considered normal tilth, right? In spring, for fall, you're going to get out, you're going to disturb your soil, roll those corn stalks in. In the spring, you're going to get out with your field cultivator, and you're going to get that soil in a nice, flat, powder-like condition. And this is what's going to demonstrate when the rainfall hits each of these four different soil, different principles of soil health. Let's do its thing, and I want you to think about the four principles: diversity, keeping a living root, don't disturb the soil, and always these are things that your producers are working to try to do, and build interest with other producers, getting them to make those things.
Look how brown the runoff is off of a conventional field there. This is runoff. The front runs are all runoff. That we don't want to see.
Right. So think about your layout tree. Think about the Milwaukee River. Think about your favorite water body and how a decision made affects the water quality. Whether that's a garden, whether that's an industrial, something not practicing best management when it comes to development side. Like I said, we're all in this together. We all have our part to play. We're all responsible. So the other thing to look at is this one right here, right? You guys see not very much water coming in here, right? What's going on? Well, you can kind of get down to see it. If it's not running off, it's infiltrating, right? Look at this middle one. So this one's been no-till 4 or 5 years, cover crops, no-till. Again, there's no water. Where's it all going? It's infiltrating into our landscape. This one here, only no-till 1 or 2 years, cover crops, go not very far into the soil health. And look at the benefits that it's already done. Granted, you're going to get some runoff. But look at in comparison. And I want you guys to think about in comparison. Just like in life, soil health's a journey. You have to start somewhere. By making one decision 1 year, you have cut your runoff by at least 6. The water's going in, it's watering your crops, and you're not only demonstrating a good agronomy, but you're good steward land. Again, look at this one right here. There's very little in here, right? So in these, I don't want you to look at the color of the soil, because these are all somewhat disturbed as I got them out. As that water goes in the soil, so it's not like in groundwater you're going to get dirty groundwater. It's just they're going through the pan, so it's protoplasm. So we've got almost an inch. We'll kind of let it go. Let's kind other questions or comments or thoughts you guys have? I'm sorry, what was that? Pennies? I only borrow Andy's pennies, so I don't keep any of mine. Oh, they ask how many pennies I lose, and I tell them I always borrow them from you, so I don't lose any. I want you to also, when this is done, step up close to it. I've got pictures here, and that shows the picture of the condition that I grab the soils from. So you can kind of representationalize yourself where it's coming from. And then that penny, look at that. So 1 penny thickness represents, depending on the soil type, about a ton of soil. Well, look at the pedestal that that soil is on. How much soil it has eroded off the landscape, you know? So probably in this rainfall year, you know, we're about an inch. We're talking tons of soil. So small changes impact soil quality and water quality immensely.
I think the most interesting part is the first row, not the pool, but the water that actually got into the top.
Infiltrates, right? Infiltrates. Yeah, yep, and that's what we want, right? Right? So it's a paradigm shift, you know. Now, I mean, at this point, it's all running off. There's not much going in.
Conventional till field will only take about 1/4 inch an hour. For a good no-till field like this one, second one from the left, that'll take 5-6 inches of rain an hour down with nothing running off.
Like Pat talked about fear being great, right? You know, from your perspective, I think in general, I think it's fear is big, right? We all have fear in our life, fear of change. I don't want to change. That's not that old. The other thing is financial. I mean, to make these big changes, it costs money. You're talking going from a conventional system with already maybe $80,000 worth of existing equipment, the chisel plow, steel cultivator, all the things that you had, all the things that you worked with your dad to get, your uncle to get, all these overhead costs you're still making payments on, right? Now you have a whole different type of equipment. You're going from this equipment to no-till planter, to no-till drill. There's that. Then you're talking, Matt mentioned the yield rate. It's real. So it's the technical assistance. It's either farmers talking to farmers. That's why Matt has gone and done some of the things that he's done. He's outreached to different national renowned individuals. Andy and his department has brought most of those renowned individuals to Ozaukee County to bring them here for these individuals for producers to see. And varying degrees of operations. So technical assistance, financial assistance, creating a network of like-minded individuals. The biggest changes are made by the people that are as government. I think we can all say we have our role. We can be maybe the glue that binds people together, that holds people together. But it's got to be something that builds and works collaboratively in between producers. And they have to, like just like in life, you make the decision at some point. Matt's made that decision. Mike's made that decision to move forward. That's from my perspective, but it's Matt and Mike that's from their perspective. And I would say many of you want to learn more. Why are people doing what? Or to see their farms? Contact Andy and set up something to go to Matt and Mike's farm and really see how these things affect your town. That's what I would say. Talk to people that are
Yeah, by year 5, you're usually kind of back to normal again.
Right down the front.
But there's definitely that first 2 to 3 years. And it all depends on the year. Every year is different. What Mother Nature gives us, whether it's super hot and dry, whether it's super cold and wet. I mean, every year is different. I mean, the last couple of years, we just kind of had these weird growing years where it just kind of is what it is. And I don't want to brag too much. But this is actually off of one of our fields, as I pride them, and that's where it came from. But this is all interseeding, that waist high interseeding that I showed you what we're planting into. Look at the runoff. That's 8 years of no-till and cover crops. And this guy here is on a couple years behind. But look at the difference of runoff you can do of just stop tilling the land. And look at the infiltration we got in the back, because this ground here is a fence road. That's in between Farmer A and Farmer B's field. Look at this amount of water we infiltrate, because this has never, ever been touched. And if you kind of see in the back, the jar in the back is just as full as the jar over here to the ground. It's never been touched. So it is something to basically, it's that take a chance. That's why I kind of wanted to show that slide, you guys. You take a chance to make change.
One other thing that Matt's hit on is we only get to plant once a year. And if Mother Nature doesn't, help us out a little bit, things can go wrong. But every year we have to learn from our mistakes, whatever we did, and try to improve the next year. We just can't go out next week and try it again. We got to wait till next spring. And if it's a different spring weather-wise, when we used to plow and chisel plow and all that, things were pretty well set. You did things in an orderly manner. This is a little different. This, you've got to be on your toes, when you can know, you got to keep the ground dry just a tad more than otherwise. But no, there's definitely advantages to this. And, we talk about fear, it's something new. To step out of your shell, you've done things 40 years one way, and suddenly you start trying. But you look at little things starting to happen, and you think, boy, them guys are on to something. But I like just look at the first one there. You can actually see now the amount of ground settling out in the bottom of that jar. Now that's an inch of water on 2 square feet of ground. Think of an inch rainstorm in Ozaukee County in spring.
And Ozaukee County is thousands and thousands of acres, and now that's an inch of rainfall in 10 minutes, which we get. Now picture if we all were tilling, that's why the rivers are drought right there.
And this isn't even that steep. This is flat
Yeah,
in comparison to a good portion of Ozaukee County that's out there. So
Maybe-
Andy wanted me to dump this out. He said he was gonna clean it up. So
Oh, this is cool.
hopefully it shows. Because we have.
It'll show the lack of infiltration.
Right. Where do you want me to dump it out? That's easiest to clean up.
I'll clean it up.
Don't go by a crack. Go in the center. And
So it wasn't taken. It wasn't all dry when I took it because we have had some rains. But it obviously you can see it's not super saturated because it's barely going through here.
we did this. Andy took me down. Where was it, Andy?
UW Milwaukee, fire it up. The Clean Rivers, Clean Lakes Conference in Milwaukee.
And we did this, and we were outside. It was the 20th of November, and we were just freezing cold. And they flipped the pan over, and the dust flew.
It was just amazing.
So that rain never penetrated even 2 inches.
It's all powdery. Right?
If I had dumped it when it was totally because I got them yesterday. I'm just saying it would have been totally dry.
Maybe you could touch on less trips across the field and explain compaction to the group.
So obviously, when we're going out with our, farming equipment, it's getting bigger. Our tractors are getting heavier. And every time we're driving across that field, we're taking this soil and we're just compressing it. We're taking all our pore space, all our earthworm holes, and we're pushing them shut. That's why it's important to let our earthworms stay alive, because they'll come back and reopen new holes. And obviously compacted soil, our cash crops and even our cover crops, which is why we're planting cover crops to loosen that soil back up. They can struggle to grow because of the compaction we've made. So that's why it's important for us farmers to, and granted, we can't always change the weather. We're gonna have years it's wet, the corn is ready to come off, it's gotta go. But we do damage to that soil. But now, and I can say this, our soil here, we can go out and we've had wet falls, and especially the last couple of years. And my wife's been chopping in 2-wheel drive because our soil is firm. It's firm, but it's soft. We've hardly extract any more.
Well, and probably in years of drought, your plants will.
We're holding a lot more water.
Yeah.
Our soil is looser and allowing them to get water. So it's pretty heavily dependent on grants in order to get the equipment. Very much so.
So I mean, something we as a county board might think about is strategic to us. How and where do we make the investments that help more farmers over that transition between traditional farming to something that's good for all of us?
The question was raised in the meeting. If you look at the bottom picture on the trailer there, that is what our inner seeder, that corn was probably knee high or a little less. And we drove this machine here, the inner seeder machine, right now we're using 3 disc combination of some grass, clover.
Grass. Do is heat tolerant plants that do good in the shade. So we have annual ryegrass, hairy veg, kale, rape, those types of things. And they do really what we've learned. The first year we didn't have annual ryegrass in the mix, and then maybe didn't do so well. And now we put annual ryegrass in. It's got a nice fibrous root system. Yeah.
It's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, but now
Find what works and what
on the
don't
market pretty well.
So in your top picture there is a field now later in fall where they came through and they harvested the corn off as grain. And now the inner seeding takes off with the light, and that'll overwinter. And then you have all that cover all winter and into spring.
And it'll start growing again. And our spring major heavy rains, that stuff now, instead of being bare soil, can be ankle high, shin high, knee high, absorbing all our rain drops to eliminate that runoff. And keep. One thing I did forget to mention when I was speaking, we are downhill from an existing neighbor. And it does eventually get to a creek, but coming off at his field onto my field, we have gained, I mean, I don't know if you guys can envision a skid loader bucket. We've gained that is coming off his field. And here to Mike from settle to be valid. I'm catching his soil. You want to get
one thing too about these farmer-led groups is there's kind of a network system that there's county farmer group, actually the Dodge County farmer group, because the idea of what type of seed mix to use, kind of live and learn, and we're all talking together, and it's really a nice network.
We meet every year in February, all the watershed groups in the state, and followed up with a Wisconsin cover crop conference for the more general public if anybody wants to attend.
So I know the governor then recently increased the budget too for booster-led groups, which was really a good move on his part.
Stage does to
we can throw it back.
the natural wildlife. I mean, it's got to produce more, or I should say mice and, that type of thing for the hawks and all the other, types of wildlife.
I'm sure it does.
I mean, that's one way you could look at getting a hold of maybe more monies, talk to some wildlife group.
And it's kind of interesting, like Pheasants Forever.
Well, yeah, when I was a kid, we used to get a lot of pheasants, and now there's nothing.
Pheasants Forever does recommend you of cover crops, and they do have some funding available for landowners too.
Corner shot them all.
Mechanism.
Can you just tie in one thing? I can chime in a little bit, but
They are delicious.
that the world view over here of that organic talks about tillage and how it releases that carbon, because organic is just carbon locked up in the soil. Once you take the tillage and oxygen to it, it oxidizes, that carbon oxidizes. So with the benefits of it, you're actually building carbon in the soil. And so, you're looking at water that infiltrates, you're looking at water that runs off. But that organic matter, when you're not disturbing your soil, you're keeping that organic matter in the soil, but you're also being able to hold on to more water. So there's all these benefits of organic matter in the soil.
In the soil, comes together more every year.
how water is so much more than it's a whole system.
We'll fix everything. We'll fix it's about emission by your cars for sure. The gas going on.
Yeah. Give us your true feeling.
I know. That's what I like about it. Kind of cut from the same cloth.
Then first couple of years and
Okay.
I didn't even like it the first time. We're spending so much money.
That's what that's.
All that stuff. Now we switch over to no-till. You know, for us, we had to buy a different corn planter. Our corn planter wasn't set up to do no-till, just not enough downforce, closing system, all that stuff. But the first couple of years were kind of similar. You know, when we were spending so much money on tillage, but now our yields are lower, but we're spending a lot less sticking into it. Once you kind of got more years into it, that's when things wow, look at this. You know, it's kind of cool.
How many areas in the United States are actually working on this end of it?
All 50 states are. It's just,
I mean, is there,
who's doing it? It's not big. Yeah.
it's not very big.
And you got your naysayers out there that my grandpa moldboard plowed and his grandpa moldboard plowed.
So maybe I always did it.
You're always gonna have them people, but you know, it's, if we can just get the majority headed this direction is what we're after.
This past year being a good fall, we figured we had over 3,000 acres in Ozaukee County planted to cover crops. This is from zero and probably zero or less than 100 for a number of years. But given the opportunity and people and having these seminars where we can go out onto the Highway 57 plant and dig roots and see the difference in the root ball of a conventional tillage and no-till. People see that. They want to see it to believe it. And I just think there's a lot of good things coming. Into it, but we're learning. This is school. I thought I was out of school. This is school, and we look back and what things we did wrong this year. Maybe our weed, our suppression of weeds, or something like that, or maybe we were in on the ground a little too early, or a little too wet. These things are all what we're working on, and the group works together and shares ideas, and when we can share ideas with other county groups, it brings us all together and ties it in. And yeah, it's one of the things that are happening out there in the country, county. If you're living in town here, it's not a big deal how much water runs off where. But I always go back to when I was a kid and we'd come down to port after a big rain, and we'd watch how a sucker brook would just get brown out there for a couple days. So, and you start to see these little things that the guys that have been in it a long time, they tell you what's going to happen, and you start to see it. And seeing is believing. And yeah, there's a hit rate or a drag on the yield and stuff, but you got to gut it out. Just because it didn't work this year, maybe we did something really wrong. We got to try something different next year. To fine tune it. And, Matt's been in this, and yeah, Matt's been the talk of the town a couple times. Things, but he's learned and he's coming through it. He's full board.
Mike and Matt, are the acres out of how many?
I don't know how many acres of
How many acres? We have about 65,000 roughly.
It's a small amount, but it's
We started at zero. Yeah, me too.
growing. And our cedar here, like this year, they tell me now that we're over 500 acres that we interseed, and that's the most ever. It's constantly climbing.
So Mike, Matt, are there any legitimate downsides? Do you have to use more
herbicides to kill the cover crops than you would otherwise. Is there any,
There's one downside. I can say it this, and I gotta watch how I say it. When you have a neighbor that is still doing conventional, they can be convinced that the water is running off yours onto theirs. But they don't see it because my water is going down and his is sitting there. And because I was listening to, actually, Rick Clark was up to us this year, but I was listening to him on our national no-till conferences, virtual this year. And he said, I can't think of one negative. I can. I got a neighbor that's mad at me because he's convinced the water's running up. But he's stubborn and won't watch this rainfall simulator. So this is why I really want you guys to come out and see this, because this is believing. This is real life.
And there are trade-offs, right? So nutrient management, pest management, it takes much more fine management. And where a conventional system, you've got a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more edge that you can make a few mistakes and get away with it. When you get into soil health, it's
finicky.
It's finicky. You really need to be on nutrient management, timing of nutrients, the amount of nutrients. So you may be looking at some nutrients front, but you need that for the system. Versus in a conventional system, you might put it all on at once. With the soil health, maybe feeding that compound more. So it's just a different type of management. But correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. Like, it takes more time and energy, and you got to pay more attention to what the land and the crops are telling you.
I do believe, though, in time, this will get to be an easier management. We'll be accustomed to it, and it'll start to fall in place, just like you were taught years ago. But it's this 5 years or so that it takes its ground to all turn around and become living.
Think of the soil as addicted. It's addicted to the system, the conventional system, the tillage, the conventional, mechanical, putting the nutrients on. It's in an addicted system. We keep feeding it. Well, when you keep feeding an addict, it's not going to change. And then when you pull whatever you were feeding it, there's a shock period. And that shock it's going to take some time for that biology, that microbiome to come to life. And that's where that yield rate comes from, is that soil slowly weaning itself off of the system that it once was on to try to find its new normal.
We basically went from conventional tillage into no-till, and it's basically like that soil was addicted to cocaine, and we pulled it like that. It's a shock. We're changing everything.
How many years since you doing it?
I kind of started dabbling in 13 by accident because I ended up in the hospital, and we couldn't get some fall tillage done, and we started changing things. Well, that works. So that's what we slowly got into it. I think 2016 I started dabbling with cover crops, and by 18 we were 100% cover crop.
I was dabbling in winter rye for 20 years, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was taking it off for feed, and I did notice it was better ground, but then we always went back and tilled. But that was just from a perspective to get more feed harvested off of my acre. But now when we start to learn some of the soil studies and just get schooled a little bit more on our ground, that's when all of this stuff starts making sense. Yeah, I love. We've been starting to no-till more. We dig into cover crops. I see so many advantages, but we are making mistakes yet, and next year we're going to try to do something different, tweak it a little bit.
I was just going to say, soil health, in my opinion, is a silver bullet, so to speak. You look at a lot of the practices that we've done in the past. We put in grass waterways, we put in buffer strips. Really, those are Band-Aid type practices. We have to get the water into the soil, and we're not going to even need a lot of those practices. And I know there's some areas in the country where they talk about even regarding floodplain management. If you can certainly get the water into the ground, you're not going to have all these floodplain issues. Like we said before, everything's interconnected and everything works together. And the more we can do this, the better for the overall environment.
Could you talk a little bit about here's really drought conditions? How big
So that's where this year was kind of because on one hand, we want to let our cover crops grow as long as we can. This particular year, I got started planting late. Mike was planting about the same time. We were throwing our corn seed in the ground and it didn't rain. Well, now we got this cover crop out there that's using water that we really need for our corn to get it germinated. So it's a lot of kind of experience and just kind of sometimes it's dumb luck. All of a sudden you do get some rain, you know, but yeah, it's a double-edged sword. We want our cover crop alive, but we also need moisture to get our corn sprouted.
But the longer you do it, the more microbial activity.
And the more water will be able to store.
Yeah.
So
man, are you 100%?
100% no-till and cover crop. Yep. Yep, we do it all the way till with the machine we have a vertical till, and we pretty much only use it just ahead of our alfalfa fields, just to get a little bit of loose ground because our alfalfa seed lays on top, just to get a little loose ground to get it to sprout. But other than that, it's I pull in the field, I plant, I pull out. Yep.
Would you want to see the planter?
Yeah. Go on over.
This planter was actually purchased from Intercedar Technologies out of Pennsylvania. There was a group of professors from Penn State that did a lot of work with Intercedar and equipment design and so on. And they actually designed this Intercedar planter and then they started marketing it. We paid about $49,000 for the planter. $5,000.
At this present time, one is enough.
Yeah,
We gotta have a tractor on it. That's why we've been able to lease this tractor, but you know, equipment is getting tighter and we've been told that this tractor, that probably is gonna happen. So we almost get the guarantee a tractor next year. We almost have to something water or finance. The neat part about this machine, it's a 15-foot machine, 15 feet wide. It's set up for like a no-till drill, every 6 inches. Every 6 inches, you got a seed disc planting unit. And then what we do is we take one unit out that would go over the corn of the plant. There's 6 holes in here right now. And basically, we run down the road and don't disturb the corn. We between the corn rows. And then in a week or so, this is supposed to go out as a no-till drill. And then we'll put the inner seed, the other units back in. Our tanks on the front are for liquid nitrogen. So some of these inner seeding, we want to be dropping liquid fertilizer at the same time. There's a spray bar that goes on the back. Really, it's a really nice machine. You know, it's heavy. It's versatile. You know, it's just a new one thing.
It's very hard to hook. It's very hard to hook up to a different tractor. That's why we want one tractor, keep it hooked up. We have a farmer that'll do some of the planting for us. We have a short window of time. Nice piece of equipment. Tractor go for it.
This tractor's a 2012 model. We're looking around.
As farm equipment is the same as automobiles right now. You can, if you wanted a tractor, you can wait a year and a half. And even that makes the used part get so smart too, because the used stuff is gone. There's nothing there. There might not be something for us to even put on the front of this thing next year. That's kind of scary.
Well, I think there's certain pockets in the state that are doing really well. Northwest Wisconsin tends to have a good group that's doing really well. I'll have to tell you that we actually have a consultant that helps us out. In-depth agronomy, they're a consultant that's kind of serves as project manager for the demo farms. Serves like a big county area. He mentioned to me that he said, I have to tell you, in Ozaukee County, I tend to see more no-till and cover crops than anywhere else in the state that I travel through. So, that's a good thing.
I would say right now there's two groups. The first one is Peninsula Pride.
Madison.
No,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that one.
Tor County,
Yep.
and up there, Kiwanee, where they have soil issues, bedrock and things like that. And there it's community there, and the Yahara Pride, which is out in Dane County. In Dane County and all their lakes, that's prize for them. So they get extra funding, and
They have a lot of money.
we've been told a couple times, we get some money from the Fund for Lake Michigan. How nice that is for us, because groups in the center of the state, they don't have that money. And this is all funds and grants, that's fueled this thing. As we serve all of Ozaukee County now, and more farmers get on board, but it's always the county board how that goes.
And it's the Madison Metro College and Sewage District. They provide a lot of money to the Yahara Pride group. And we're hoping at some point maybe that MMSD can maybe provide some money, because they're very concerned about our watershed here and all of the runoff going to the city of Milwaukee. So that's another avenue. Possibly too. Kevin Schaefer, their executive director, he'll come and visit with us. He's very mindful of what's happening and how we can work together. No,
they're just getting started.
I attended other lake districts and talked about our group. And really nice because there's a nice network. We're all sharing and we're all learning. It's great to have Mike. Well, our staff in our department, we tend to grease it, clean it. Mike does a lot for us. Mike is our fabricator. He's the brain of it.
Usually comes up on us, and if we got the day when not so much going on, we'll clean it up a little bit, or just help it out. This stored, but this year, Matt has got the print provided him. If you believe it, I believe in this. We've got to be the ones that can go by the horns. It's real,
Mike is very helpful. We have an issue right now with the scale. We go to the mastermind, right? And he tells us what to do. Figures things out for the group.
Wow, so this, you say you might lose this piece of equipment. Exactly. Why? Where is it going?
Oh, okay. What happens is it's perfect year. Grain farmers having a good year. So at the end of the year, they're going to come in the cash. Instead of paying taxes, you upgrade your equipment. Somebody might just want this tractor.
We're leasing this right now.
We're leasing this right now. We've been able to lease this the last.
Can't we buy it?
Oh, we can buy it, but
We don't have the funds. Okay, I'm saying,
that's
okay, we can buy it, or if we can't renew a lease, they won't renew a lease.
They can sell it to the price.
Just for the tractor. That was roughly 49,000. It sure would help. Oh, we got it. Sure. Everything is.
You can't get new ones, so all the used stuff is getting brought up. I mean, you look at any agriculture dealer lots, they're bare, just like automobile lots, nothing there. So, yeah, COVID screwed up a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's great, especially with cabin.
How do we buy the tractor, Mr. Administrator?
With money?
Rescue funds. We got rescue funds.
We've got the money.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you, board, for allowing us to, come in today and let you know what's happening out in the
Thank you
country.
guys learned a lot. Thanks for listening.
Mike, you gotta do this more often. Very good.
Can you tell?